Noah Richardson, a wealthy and lonely politician, falls in love with Ava Morgan, a waitress and single mother abandoned by her child's father, at a gala celebrating Donald Trump's victory. What happens when two completely different worlds collide in a single unforgettable moment? Will love be enough to bridge the gap? Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. The Grand Gala Hall was a spectacle of opulence, a sanctuary for the elite, where laughter floated like a gentle breeze and the clinking of glasses punctuated the air with a melodic rhythm. Chandeliers glittered above, casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors, which reflected the rich hues of the evening attire worn by the guests. Men donned tailored suits, their ties impeccably knotted, while women dazzled in elegant gowns that swirled around them like whispers of silk and satin. It was a night of celebration, dedicated to the triumph of Donald Trump, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and ambition. Noah Richardson stood slightly apart from the throng, a glass of champagne cradled in his hand, his gaze sweeping across the sea of familiar faces. He was a successful politician, a man who had clawed his way to the top through sheer determination and an unyielding will. Yet, despite the accolades and the adoration he received from his peers, a profound loneliness enveloped him, an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt like a ghost, drifting through the crowd, observing without truly engaging. The laughter and chatter only served to amplify his isolation, and he yearned for a genuine connection, one that transcended the superficiality of his world. As he sipped his drink, his eyes fell upon Ava Morgan, a waitress gliding gracefully between tables, her presence a stark contrast to the polished surroundings. She wore a simple black dress, but it clung to her figure in a way that accentuated her warmth and vitality. Her dark hair framed her face, and her expression, though focused on her duties, held a softness that drew him in. Ava moved with a quiet confidence, her smile brightening the faces of those she served, yet there was a hint of weariness in her eyes, a depth that spoke of struggles unseen. In that moment, Noah felt an inexplicable pull toward her, a flicker of intrigue that ignited within him, momentarily banishing the shadows of his own solitude. Ava juggled her responsibilities, deftly balancing trays of drinks and plates of hors d'oeuvres, all the while stealing glances at Noah. He stood tall, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. There was something about him. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, or the intensity of his gaze, that captivated her. She had seen men like him before, wrapped in power and prestige, but he seemed different, almost vulnerable in his detachment. As she moved through the crowd, her thoughts wandered to the life she had carved for herself, one that was filled with challenges but also moments of grace. The weight of her past, the abandonment by her child's father, lingered in the back of her mind, a constant reminder of the sacrifices she made for her son. When their eyes met across the hall, an electric tension sparked between them, a silent acknowledgement of their mutual curiosity. Noah felt as if the noise of the gala had faded into a distant hum, the world narrowing down to just the two of them. Ava's heart raced, and she quickly looked away, flustered by the unspoken connection that had formed in that fleeting moment. It was a brief but significant encounter, one that left them both pondering the possibilities of what lay beyond their vastly different lives. As the night unfolded, Noah found himself increasingly drawn to Ava. He watched her as she moved about the room, her laughter mingling with the clamor of conversation, her kindness evident in the way she interacted with the guests. There was a sincerity in her demeanor that resonated with him, something he had not encountered in the cutthroat world of politics. He felt a stirring within him, a longing for authenticity that had long been buried beneath layers of ambition and expectation. Later, as the gala continued to swirl around them, Noah made his way through the throng, his heart pounding as he approached her. The moment felt charged, the air thick with anticipation. He offered her a rare moment of attention, their brief interaction punctuated by shared laughter that echoed softly amidst the clamor. It was a simple exchange, yet it crackled with energy, igniting a spark that neither of them could ignore. For Noah, it was a reminder of the humanity he had pushed aside in his relentless pursuit of power. For Ava, It was a glimpse of something more, something that could perhaps lift her from the burdens of her everyday life. In that instant, as they stood together, the weight of expectations and the pressures of their respective worlds momentarily faded. Noah felt an unfamiliar sense of joy, a lightness that he had almost forgotten existed, while Ava's heart swelled with the exhilaration of being seen, truly seen, by someone so seemingly unreachable. But as he turned to rejoin his circle of influential friends, the harsh realities of their lives loomed large once more. The laughter and sophistication of the gala faded into the background, replaced by the relentless demands of his political career and the complexities of Ava's life as a single mother. The night wore on, and the gala continued to pulse with energy, filled with the promises of power and influence. Yet, in the midst of the celebration, both Noah and Ava found themselves grappling with their thoughts. Noah returned to his circle, but his mind wandered back to the warmth of Ava's smile, the way her eyes sparkled with life. He could not shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason, that there was something profound waiting to unfold between them. Ava, on the other hand, resumed her duties, but the memory of their connection lingered in her mind, a sweet ache that filled her with both hope and trepidation. As the gala began to wind down and the guests filtered out, Noah lingered a moment longer, his gaze searching for Ava amidst the fading glitter of the evening. He knew that this was merely the beginning, a tantalizing glimpse of a world he had been too afraid to explore. In the depths of his heart, he felt the stirrings of change, an awakening that could lead him down a path he had never anticipated. Meanwhile, Ava, cleaning up the remnants of the night, couldn't shake off the impression Noah had left on her. The encounter had ignited a flicker of hope in her heart, a yearning for something more than the life she led. And so, as the last of the guests departed, both Noah and Ava stood on the precipice of a new chapter, their lives intertwined in ways they could not yet comprehend. Each felt the weight of their respective worlds pressing down on them, yet the promise of connection flickered in the air, a beacon of light in the darkness. The night was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, ambition, and the courage to embrace the unknown. Ava Morgan stepped through the door of her small, cluttered apartment, the familiar scent of home wrapping around her like a warm blanket. The faint sound of her son's toys clattering on the floor greeted her, a reminder of the life she had built in the wake of abandonment. The modest space was filled with mismatched furniture and family photos that documented their journey. Her son, a bright-eyed boy with an unruly mop of hair, grinned back at her from the wall. Despite its imperfections, this was her sanctuary, a refuge from the world outside. As she entered the living room, her heart swelled at the sight of him. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, engrossed in a colorful puzzle that sprawled across the carpet. The way he concentrated, his little tongue peeking out in concentration, brought a smile to her face. She had fought tooth and nail to provide for him, to ensure that he always had a safe place to land, and seeing him happy made every struggle worthwhile. But as she dropped her bag by the door, Ava's mind drifted back to the gala. The opulence of that night felt like a distant dream, a world so far removed from her own. She recalled the moment their eyes had locked across the crowded room, the electric connection that had sparked between her and Noah Richardson, the powerful politician who had stepped into her mundane world like a sunbeam breaking through clouds. There was something about him, his sharp features, the way he carried himself with an air of authority, and yet, in that fleeting moment, she had seen a vulnerability that resonated with her own. It was a rare glimpse of a man who, despite the wealth and success, felt a similar loneliness, a longing for something genuine. Ava moved into the kitchen, the clatter of her keys echoing in the silence. She poured herself a glass of water, the cool liquid soothing her dry throat. She could still feel the warmth of Noah's laughter, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It had been a brief encounter, just a few exchanged words amidst the clinking of glasses and the buzz of political chatter, yet it lingered in her mind like a sweet melody. But with that sweetness came a tinge of apprehension. What would a man like him want with someone like her? She was just a waitress, a single mother scrambling to make ends meet, while he was a figure of power and prestige. The disparity between their worlds loomed larger than ever, threatening to crush the fleeting hope that had begun to blossom in her heart. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling out from the living room. "Mommy!" Her son bounded toward her, his face lighting up with joy. Ava knelt to embrace him, her heart swelling at the sight of his innocent happiness. She kissed the top of his head, the familiar scent of his shampoo filling her senses. In that moment, everything else faded away. She was his mother, his protector, and that was all that mattered. As they settled onto the couch, snuggling under a blanket, Ava's mind continued to wander back to Noah. She could picture him in his luxurious penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of his success, yet feeling just as lonely as she was. The thought stirred a mix of excitement and fear within her. What if he sought her out again? What if their paths crossed once more? She felt a flutter of anticipation at the idea, but it was quickly overshadowed by the nagging voice of doubt. She had built a life for herself that revolved around her son, and the last thing she wanted was to introduce complications into their world. Meanwhile, Noah Richardson stood alone in his sleek, modern penthouse, the city skyline stretching out before him like a glittering sea of lights. The echoes of the gala still reverberated in his mind, the laughter and the clinking of glasses fading into the background as he reflected on the evening's significant moment. Ava's face was etched in his memory, her laughter soothing the chaos that usually surrounded him. He had grown accustomed to the superficiality of his social circle, but meeting her had stirred something deep within him, a yearning for authenticity, for connection beyond the polished facades. Noah leaned against the cool glass of his balcony, the brisk night air filling his lungs. He allowed himself to think about her, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the warmth that radiated from her despite the coldness of the environment around them. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning his choices, the life he had crafted around power and influence. Was this truly what he wanted? The political game had become a wearying cycle of alliances and betrayals, leaving him isolated at the top. He thought about the brief conversation they had shared, the way her smile had ignited something inside him that he had almost forgotten existed. There was a sincerity in her that was so refreshing, so different from the calculated interactions he was used to. The thought of returning to that empty existence, devoid of genuine connection, filled him with dread. He craved more than what his status offered: a deeper bond, a shared journey, a partner who could see him for who he truly was beyond the public persona. Noah's mind raced with possibilities. He knew he had to see her again, to break free from the suffocating expectations of his political life. But what would he say? How could he bridge the vast chasm that separated their worlds? The realization struck him with force. He didn't merely want to know her. He wanted to be part of her life. He wanted to know her struggles, her joys, her hopes for the future. The thought invigorated him, igniting a determination he hadn't felt in years. He turned from the balcony, the city lights flickering like stars in the distance, and made his way back inside. He would find a way to reach her. He had to. The next morning arrived, and the sun cast a golden hue over the city, illuminating everything it touched. Noah made his way to the diner where Ava worked, a quaint little establishment that seemed to thrive on the warmth of community. He parked his sleek car a few blocks away, wanting to keep a low profile. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the comforting scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries enveloped him. Inside, the ambience was alive with the chatter of regular patrons and the clattering of dishes. Noah took a moment to observe the scene. He spotted Ava behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face illuminated by a genuine smile as she interacted with a group of customers. The sight sent a rush of warmth through him, and he felt a surge of hope. This was her world, vibrant and real, and he wanted to be part of it. However, as he approached, he noticed the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes when she caught sight of him. The warmth of their previous encounter seemed distant, and he could see the hesitation etched on her face. Noah understood her reluctance. They came from different worlds, and the fear of crossing that divide was palpable. He sensed her apprehension, the weight of her responsibilities pulling her back. Ava's gaze darted away, and Noah felt a pang of disappointment mixed with determination. He wouldn't let her retreat into the shadows of doubt. He wanted to assure her that their connection was real, that it could exist beyond the constraints of their circumstances. But for now, he needed to tread carefully, to show her that he was not just another fleeting moment in her life. As the minutes passed, Noah remained at the counter, sipping his coffee and watching her work. He noticed the way she engaged with customers, her warmth drawing them in like a moth to flame. She was in her element, a stark contrast to the world he inhabited, where every interaction was calculated and purposeful. Here, she was free, unguarded, and it made him yearn for that same authenticity. But as the shift continued, he could see the weariness creeping into her demeanor. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her, and he could almost hear the unspoken words swirling in her mind. She was hesitant to engage, to let him in, and he couldn't blame her. The walls she had built around her heart were formidable, forged by years of struggle and heartbreak. Noah took a deep breath, resolving to be patient. He would not push her. He would wait for the moment she felt ready to let him in. He was determined to show her that he was different, that he could be a part of her world without overwhelming it. And as he sat there, watching her move with grace and purpose, he felt a new sense of purpose ignite within him. The path ahead might be uncertain, but he was ready to navigate it, one step at a time. Noah Richardson settled into the familiar booth at the diner, a small sanctuary from the chaos of his political life. The bustling sounds of clinking dishes and murmured conversations surrounded him, but his focus was solely on Ava Morgan. Each day, her presence drew him in deeper, a gravitational pull he found difficult to resist. He observed her as she moved deftly between tables, her smile brightening the dimly lit room. Though she wore a waitress uniform, there was an elegance in her posture, a resilience that captivated him. As Noah sat there, he couldn't help but recall their initial meeting during the gala. The memory of her laughter, the brightness of her eyes, and the way the world seemed to fade around them lingered in his mind. He knew that their connection was unique, a fleeting moment that had somehow anchored itself in his heart. However, he also recognized the wall she had built around herself. There was a hesitance in her gaze when they first spoke, a wariness that spoke volumes about her past and the burdens she carried as a single mother. Ava approached his table, her expression shifting from professional to personal as she caught his eye. He noticed the subtle way her demeanor softened, as if she were allowing him a glimpse into the guarded space of her heart. She poured him a fresh cup of coffee, steam rising into the air, and for a moment, they shared a silence filled with unspoken understanding. He could see the shadows of struggle etched on her face. The traces of sleepless nights and worries for her son loomed larger than he could ever comprehend. Day by day, their conversations grew longer, the barriers between them gradually eroding. Noah learned about Ava's life, her struggles to provide for her son, the challenges of raising a child alone, and the sting of abandonment that still lingered. He listened intently, his heart aching for her in ways he hadn't anticipated. She spoke of the dreams she had once harbored before life had taken a difficult turn. As she unfolded her story, he felt an overwhelming desire to shield her from the harsh realities that had defined her existence. Yet, even as their bond deepened, Ava remained cautious. The disparity between their worlds loomed large, an invisible chasm that threatened to swallow them both. She often glanced away when the conversation grew too personal, fear creeping into her expression. Noah could sense her hesitation. It was a palpable tension that hovered over them like a storm cloud. He knew that she was afraid of the judgment that would come from his political associates, afraid of the implications of their relationship, and, most importantly, afraid of the potential fallout for her son should things not work out. Meanwhile, Noah faced mounting pressure from his political allies. Whispers of discontent echoed through the halls of power, where loyalty was currency and appearances were everything. The prominent figures around him, men and women who had climbed the ladder of success through backroom deals and strategic marriages, viewed his growing attachment to Ava with disdain. They claimed that mingling with someone from such a humble background would tarnish his reputation. Their words dripped with condescension, dismissing Ava as a mere distraction, a potential liability in a world that thrived on image and status. Noah listened to their warnings, But with each passing day, the resolve in his heart only grew stronger. He found himself torn between the expectations of his allies and the undeniable connection he felt with Ava. The more he learned about her, the more he realized that his life had been devoid of true substance. Surrounded by wealth and power, he had never felt truly seen until he met her. Ava's laughter, her struggles, and her unwavering dedication to her son painted a vivid picture of resilience that he had never encountered in his political circles. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the diner's windows, Noah found himself at a crossroads. He was seated at their usual booth, the aroma of coffee and pancakes wafting through the air. Ava stood nearby, her brow furrowed as she juggled orders and customers. He noticed the weariness in her eyes, a reflection of the long hours she put in to make ends meet. It tugged at his heartstrings, igniting a fierce protectiveness within him. In that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. He would not let Ava slip away, nor would he allow the opinions of others dictate his feelings. She deserved to know that she was worth more than the judgments cast upon her by those who couldn't see beyond their privilege. He needed to tell her that, to assure her that he was ready to challenge the world for her. However, the universe had other plans. Just as he was gathering the courage to voice his intentions, one of his associates stormed into the diner, a looming figure with a sharp tongue. The atmosphere shifted instantly, tension crackling in the air. Noah's heart raced as he braced himself for the fallout. He could see the recognition in Ava's eyes, the way her smile faltered as she began to piece together the dynamics at play. The associate wasted no time, his voice dripping with disdain as he addressed Noah in front of the patrons. The words were laced with criticism, an attempt to belittle not only Noah but also Ava. He questioned Noah's judgment, insinuating that his association with the waitress was a sign of weakness, a betrayal of the elite standards to which he was expected to adhere. The others in the diner watched in quiet discomfort, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily on the room. Noah felt a surge of anger rise within him, a fierce protectiveness for Ava igniting like wildfire. He glanced at her, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance, and in that moment, he realized that he had a choice to make. He could either back down, shrinking into the shadows of his corporate allies, or he could stand tall, forging a path that was true to his heart. With each word from his associate, the decision crystallized. He would not allow anyone to demean Ava or their connection. He rose from the booth, his stance firm as he faced the man. The diner seemed to hush, the weight of the confrontation filling the air. Noah's heart pounded, but he felt a resolve that he hadn't known existed within him. He would defend the woman who had brought light into his life, the woman who had shown him what it meant to truly care for someone. As he prepared to speak, the world around him faded into a blur. The clattering of dishes, the murmurs of patrons, and even the flickering neon lights outside all faded into the background. In that moment, it was just him and Ava, caught in a whirlwind of emotions, the gravity of their circumstances drawing them closer together even as the storm raged outside. Noah stood there, ready to confront the harsh reality of his world. He had to make a stand, not just for Ava but for himself. The battle lines were drawn, and he felt an undeniable sense of purpose rise within him. The choice was clear, and he was ready to fight for what truly mattered. Noah stood in the dimly lit gathering, a private event that felt more like a pressure cooker than a celebration. The air was thick with unspoken judgments, his peers' eyes boring into him, each gaze a silent inquiry into his recent choices. He had made a decision to stand by Ava, to declare his feelings for her, and now he found himself in a room filled with the very people who questioned his judgment. The plush surroundings of the venue, adorned with crystal chandeliers and gilded decor, felt oppressive, contrasting sharply with the warmth and authenticity he had come to associate with Ava. As he scanned the room, Noah's heart raced. The murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some regarded him with admiration, nodding in approval, while others whispered behind their hands, faces twisted with disbelief. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of expectations bearing down on him. These were the very people who had molded him into the politician he had become, yet now they seemed like strangers, as if the very foundation of his identity was being questioned. His mind flickered back to that evening at the gala, where Ava's laughter had cut through the dense fog of his political life. The way she moved with grace, the light in her eyes that spoke of resilience, had captivated him. It was a connection he had never anticipated forming, and yet here he was on the precipice of a new path, willing to risk everything for a chance at authenticity. He could still feel the warmth of her hand in his, the softness of her smile etched in his memory. Noah took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he prepared to address the room. The moment felt monumental, as if he stood on the brink of a cliff, ready to leap into the unknown. He spoke with conviction, detailing his commitment to Ava, the woman whose strength and determination had touched him in ways he had never expected. His words flowed like a river, fueled by passion and the desire to defy the expectations that had been placed upon him. Yet, as he spoke, he could see the ripple effects of his declaration. Faces that once held admiration now contorted into expressions of skepticism. Noah felt the air thicken as the reality of his choice settled in. He was not merely choosing Ava. He was choosing to step away from the life he had meticulously built. The consequences loomed like storm clouds on the horizon, darkening the atmosphere around him. In the corner of the room, a group of his political allies exchanged glances, their whispers growing louder. Noah could almost hear their thoughts. How could he jeopardize his career for someone so ordinary? The questioning stung, burrowing into his mind like a persistent thorn. He felt vulnerable, exposed, standing there amidst the echoes of their derision. After his speech, the applause was lukewarm, a meager acknowledgement of his bravery overshadowed by the palpable tension. Yet, amidst the sea of uncertainty, there was a flicker of hope. Noah's heart raced at the thought of Ava, her laughter, her spirit. He had chosen her, and no amount of backlash could diminish that choice. But as he mingled with the crowd, he felt a chasm opening between him and the world he once knew. Meanwhile, Ava was at home, enveloped in a whirlwind of emotions. The dim light from the street lamp outside barely illuminated her modest living room, and her son's toys lay scattered across the floor, remnants of a day filled with laughter. But tonight, the room felt heavy, filled with uncertainty. She replayed Noah's declaration in her mind, the intensity of his gaze, the warmth of his words. Yet, with each recollection, her insecurities rose to the surface. Ava had never imagined a life intertwined with someone as powerful as Noah. The stark contrast between their worlds loomed large in her mind. She felt like a fragile ship tossed upon a tumultuous sea, struggling to find her course. The memory of her past, the abandonment by her child's father, weighed heavily upon her heart, casting shadows on her newfound feelings. What if she wasn't enough for him? What if their worlds were too different to bridge? As the night deepened, Ava wrestled with her thoughts. She could almost feel the walls of her small apartment closing in on her, mirroring the constriction in her chest. The very notion of stepping into Noah's world terrified her. She wondered if she was merely a fleeting moment in his life, a brief distraction from the weight of his responsibilities. The thought made her stomach churn. The storm that had begun to brew outside mirrored the turmoil within her. Raindrops began to patter against the window, a rhythmic reminder of the chaos that echoed in her mind. Would she allow herself to fall for him, only to have her heart shattered once more? The memories of her past loomed large, a constant reminder of how quickly things could change. As the clock ticked away, Ava felt a growing sense of dread. The promise of Noah's feelings seemed too good to be true. She felt the distance between them expanding, as though an invisible barrier had been erected, one that threatened to separate their worlds. The thought of facing the reality of their relationship filled her with anxiety. Noah, on the other hand, lay awake in his king-sized bed, the sheets tangled around him like the emotions swirling in his mind. The city skyline glimmered outside his penthouse window, a stark reminder of the life he had built. A life filled with accolades, power, and yet, an overwhelming sense of loneliness. He had chosen to stand by Ava, but now he felt the weight of that choice pressing down on him. Memories of the private gathering flooded back, and he could still hear the murmurs of disbelief. He had known the risks, Yet every moment spent with Ava made him question everything he had known. Was he willing to sacrifice his career, the very thing he had dedicated his life to, for the chance at a genuine connection? The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. Noah gazed out at the stars, each one a beacon of hope in the darkness. He yearned for the warmth of Ava's presence, the comfort of her laughter. But the reality of their differences loomed large, a looming shadow that threatened to engulf him whole. He pondered the sacrifices he might have to make, the alliances he might lose. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling like a siren's call. The rain poured down in sheets, a cacophony of sound echoing his internal struggle. He could feel the storm brewing not just in the skies but within himself, a tempest of emotions that threatened to spiral out of control. As the night wore on, both Noah and Ava found themselves at a crossroads, each wrestling with their feelings and the uncertainty of their future. The world outside may have been chaotic, but it paled in comparison to the storm that raged within them. Each was determined to find clarity, yet the path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty, like the dark clouds that loomed over the city, waiting to unleash their fury. Days passed since their heated argument, and Noah Richardson found himself ensnared in a web of solitude. The lavish halls of political power, once a source of pride and validation, now felt like a gilded cage. The laughter and camaraderie of his colleagues echoed hollowly around him, each clink of a glass underlining the growing chasm between his public life and private heart. He wandered through the corridors of his penthouse, the pristine decor and meticulously curated art pieces serving as constant reminders of his success. Yet, amid such opulence, Noah felt a profound emptiness that gnawed at his core. The world of politics, which had once seemed vibrant and full of potential, now felt tainted by the insincerity that often accompanied it. Conversations with his aides had become mechanical, reducing his interactions to mere transactions devoid of warmth. Each day, he found himself looking out the expansive windows, gazing at the sprawling city beneath, yet feeling more disconnected from it than ever. The memories of Ava Morgan, the waitress who had unwittingly breached the walls around his heart, haunted him. Her laughter, her fierce determination, and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her son were contrasts to the cold, calculated exchanges he faced daily. He began to question the values that had propelled him into the upper echelons of society. Was it worth sacrificing genuine connection and love for the sake of ambition? The question lingered in his mind, demanding an answer. Noah knew that the world he had built around himself was fragile, relying on alliances that were contingent upon his adherence to the unwritten rules of their political game. But the thought of returning to that life without Ava felt unbearable. Meanwhile, Ava Morgan confronted her own demons in the small apartment she called home. The walls were adorned with drawings her son had made, vibrant colors that contrasted sharply with the muted tones of her own anxiety. As she prepared dinner, her mind raced with thoughts of Noah. Their brief moments together had ignited something deep within her, a flicker of hope that had long been dimmed by the harsh realities of her life. Yet, the weight of her responsibilities pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had to consider her son's future, a future that felt precarious with every passing day. Ava spent hours replaying their last conversation in her mind, the words exchanged echoing painfully as she washed the dishes. The fear of inadequacy loomed large, whispering doubts that made her question whether she could truly belong in Noah's world. The disparity in their lives felt insurmountable at times, a chasm filled with the expectations of society and the weight of her past. She envisioned scenarios where she would have to explain to her son why things couldn't work out, how she had tried but ultimately failed to keep a good man in their lives. The thought made her stomach churn. As she tucked her son into bed that night, she fought back tears. She wanted to be strong for him, to show him that life could be beautiful despite its challenges. But the truth was, her heart was heavy with indecision. She had made up her mind to end things with Noah, believing it would be the right choice for both of them. She couldn't allow herself to be the reason for his downfall, and she couldn't bear the thought of her son being hurt by the complexities of adult relationships. Just as she resolved to move on, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence of the small apartment. A text from Noah appeared on the screen, simple yet loaded with meaning. Can we meet? I need to talk." The words sent a jolt through her, igniting a whirlwind of emotions. Ava's heart raced as she stared at the message, her mind racing through a myriad of possibilities. What could he possibly want to discuss? Did he feel the same longing she felt? Torn between her heart and her head, she hesitated. The logical part of her brain screamed to ignore the message, to protect herself and her son from the tumultuous nature of their connection. But the other part, the part that had felt alive in Noah's presence, begged her to reconsider. Ava found herself pacing the small living room, her thoughts spiraling into chaos. It was as if she stood at a crossroads, each path leading to vastly different futures. Noah, too, felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on him as he awaited Ava's response. Each passing minute felt like an eternity, and he questioned whether he had made a mistake reaching out. The vulnerability he had shown felt like a gamble, one that could either lead to redemption or further isolation. He needed her to understand that he was willing to fight for what they had, that the connection they shared was worth the risks. As the minutes stretched on, Noah's mind drifted back to the moments they had shared. He remembered the way she smiled when she spoke of her son, the passion in her voice as she recounted her dreams for their future. He could feel the warmth of her hand in his, the way her laughter rang like music in his ears. Those memories anchored him, reminding him that life was about more than power and prestige. Ava's phone buzzed again, pulling her from her reverie. The message was simple yet filled with urgency. "Please, Ava, I need to see you." Her heart raced even harder now. The longing in his words resonated within her, igniting a flicker of hope. But the fear that followed was suffocating. What if she stepped into his world and realized she didn't belong there? As the night deepened, Ava wrestled with her emotions, each heartbeat echoing the turmoil within her. She glanced at her son, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the chaos of adult decisions swirling around him. A part of her wanted to protect him from the complexities of her heart, from the potential heartbreak that a relationship with Noah could bring. But another part craved the connection they had begun to forge, the possibility of a life filled with love and support. Noah paced his penthouse, his mind a tempest of hope and anxiety. The emptiness that had plagued him since their last encounter felt amplified in her absence. He could no longer ignore the truth that had settled deep within him. He wanted to be with Ava, not just for himself but for the possibility of building a future that encompassed both of their worlds. As the clock ticked on, Ava finally made a decision. She would meet Noah. She owed it to herself, to him, and to the connection they had ignited. Stepping into the unknown was frightening, but the thought of walking away from something that had the potential to bring her joy felt even more daunting. With trembling hands, she typed a response, "Okay, where and when?" In that moment, a flicker of hope ignited within both of them as they prepared to confront the uncertainties that lay ahead. The world outside continued to spin, indifferent to the choices they were about to make. But for Noah and Ava, everything hung in the balance, suspended between fear and the promise of something beautiful. In the quiet embrace of the park, where the sun filtered through the leaves and painted dappled patterns on the ground, Noah and Ava found themselves at a crossroads. This was no grand gala or bustling diner. It was a sanctuary away from the noise of their respective worlds. The air was thick with anticipation as they settled onto a weathered bench, its wood warm from the sun, each lost in thoughts swirling around their hearts. Noah glanced at Ava, taking in her features softened by the late afternoon light. Her hair danced gently in the breeze, and for a moment, he was captivated by the way she seemed to glow with a quiet strength. This was a woman who had fought battles he could barely fathom. Yet here she was, vulnerable and exposed, opening up to him in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He could sense her hesitation, the walls she had built around her heart, and he knew how important this moment was for both of them. Ava looked down at her hands, fingers intertwined, as she struggled to voice the fears that churned within her. She had always been the protector, the one who had to hold everything together for her son. The notion of letting Noah into her life felt like stepping onto a tightrope, a dangerous venture that could end in disaster. What if he turned out to be just like the men who had hurt her before? What if her past, with its shadows and uncertainties, became a burden too heavy for him to bear. These thoughts spiraled in her mind, trembling at the edges of her heart. Noah, sensing her trepidation, took a deep breath. He had been a man of power, of decisions that impacted lives, but this was different. He was sitting across from a woman who represented everything he had longed for in the emptiness of his successful yet lonely existence. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that he was not like the others, that his intentions were pure. But how could he convey the depth of his feelings without overwhelming her? The weight of his own fears, of losing what he had just begun to cherish, pressed upon him. As they exchanged glances, a silence enveloped them, heavy with unspoken words. Noah finally reached out, his hand brushing against hers, a gentle connection that sparked warmth between them. Ava's heart raced at the contact, the sensation grounding her in the moment. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, and in that gaze, they shared a silent understanding. They were both searching for something, grappling with uncertainties, yet yearning for the same thing: connection, acceptance, and love. Just as the tension began to ease, a shadow loomed at the edge of the park, disrupting their intimate bubble. Ava's breath caught as she recognized the figure approaching them, a man from her past, the father of her child. His presence was like a storm cloud rolling in, darkening the joyful moment they had begun to cherish. Panic surged through her as memories flooded back. Harsh words, broken promises, and a deep sense of betrayal. She had hoped never to see him again, had fought so hard to distance herself from that part of her life. Noah, noticing her sudden shift in demeanor, followed her gaze and felt a rush of protectiveness. The man was tall, with an air of entitlement that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. As he drew closer, the tension escalated, the air thickening with unspoken threats. Noah's heart raced, not just for himself but for Ava, who was now visibly shaken. He could see the fear in her eyes, and it ignited a fire within him. He would not let her be dragged back into a past she had worked so hard to escape. The confrontation began with a biting remark from the man, his voice dripping with disdain. He was here to reclaim what he thought was his, to assert control over a life he had long abandoned. Ava flinched at his words, the weight of their shared history crashing down on her. But Noah stood tall, his posture unwavering, an embodiment of strength that Ava desperately needed. He felt a surge of determination. This was not just about him or Ava, but about standing up for what was right. Without a flicker of doubt, Noah confronted the man, his voice steady and firm. He was not just defending Ava. He was dismantling the power that this man had over her life. With each word, Noah laid bare the truth of the situation, the abandonment, the lack of responsibility, and the pain inflicted upon Ava and their child. The man's bravado faltered under the weight of Noah's conviction. With a subtle motion, Noah revealed a folder from his blazer, filled with evidence of the man's wrongdoings, financial irresponsibility, threats made, and a history of neglect. As the man's bravado crumbled, the situation escalated. Noah's unwavering stance and the evidence he presented drew the attention of a nearby park security officer who had noticed the rising tension. In a matter of moments, the authorities stepped in, and the man was taken away, his threats dissipating into the air like smoke. Ava watched, her heart racing, a mix of relief and disbelief flooding over her. She had envisioned this moment 1,000 times, but had never imagined it would play out like this, with someone standing up for her, with someone willing to fight for their future. After the confrontation, the park felt transformed. The sun, once hidden behind clouds, broke through, casting a warm glow over them. Noah turned to Ava, searching her eyes for a sign that she understood the depths of his commitment. In that moment, all the doubts and fears they had harbored seemed to fade away, eclipsed by the reality they had just faced together. They had confronted their pasts, and together, they had emerged stronger. Emotions swirled between them, and without thinking, Noah stepped closer, enfolding Ava in his arms. The warmth of their embrace felt like a promise, a vow that they would face whatever came next together. Ava melted into him, feeling the strength of his body, the safety of his presence. In that moment, the worries that had plagued her began to dissolve. She realized that Noah was not just a powerful politician. He was a man who understood her struggles, who saw her for who she truly was, and who was willing to fight for their love. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world around them faded away. The laughter of children playing nearby, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, and the distant sounds of the city became mere background noise to the symphony of their hearts beating in sync. Ava pulled back slightly, looking into Noah's eyes, and in that gaze, they found a shared understanding, an acknowledgement that they could face the world together. Hand in hand, they began to walk through the park, the shadows of their pasts fading behind them. Noah felt a new sense of purpose igniting within him, a drive to advocate for single parents, to use his platform to bring change and support to those who had faced similar struggles as Ava. He envisioned a future where he could make a real difference, where love and compassion could guide his political aspirations. Ava, too, felt a newfound strength surging within her. With Noah by her side, she realized she could redefine her life, not just for herself, but for her son as well. She could be the role model she had always wanted to be, someone who stood strong in the face of adversity, who fought for her happiness and the happiness of her child. As they walked, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the path ahead. It was a new beginning for both of them, a journey filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. They were no longer defined by their pasts, but were instead bound by the love they had discovered within each other, a love that had the power to change everything. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their commitment to one another and the life they would build together.